All right, good afternoon, or good morning. It feels like afternoon for me already. I have really appreciated being here. My name's Adam Peacocke, and I am tasked not only with sharing a bit about our story with disaster, but getting us out of here by 11:15. And I really want to be faithful to do that. I'm just feeling so enriched from this time. I'm so grateful that you chose to be here this morning. And the plan, kind of the setup that we have decided, will probably be best, is for me to take maybe 20 to 25 minutes and make a quick presentation, and then for us to be able to interact for a while. Please just raise your hand. Please interrupt, and we'll do what's best. I'll be honest with you, we were just having a little sidebar here. For me, one of the most important things that could come out of today is just relationship. That you have my email, or that hey, there's someone we can reach out to. A little bit about me. I right now am leading a faith-based organization, faith-based nonprofit that works to bring greater connection and collaboration among the churches of Sonoma County. Sonoma County is in kind of the wine country of the Bay Area, north of San Francisco. We have about 500,000 people. Our county seat is in the city of Santa Rosa, which is my hometown. It's about 175,000, so population-wise, I think pretty similar to Eugene. I was born and raised there. Before I did the work I'm doing now, I was pastoring a local church in Santa Rosa. And in 2017, my life changed and our community changed because of devastating wildfires. Some of you may remember that at the time, these wildfires, the Tubbs Fire and the Nuns Fire, were the most destructive wildfires in California history. And so the Tubbs Fire became the most destructive, and the Nuns Fire was the sixth most destructive. This is like dollar value when we're talking about that. In the same night, two of the top six most destructive wildfires hitting our community. They're no longer, unfortunately, the most destructive. But to give you a sense of scale that's a little more recent, the Eaton Fire in Pasadena, Altadena, is about the same as the scope of what we had in Sonoma County. So just, as a point of giving you a chance to get to know me a little bit more as well. I'm married. I've got 4 children. They're all kind of coming into young adulthood between the ages of 24 and 16, 3 girls and a boy. And I've known about what's going on here in Lane County for over a decade through relationship with Tom and Terry White, and then with Steve and Patty. They've become good friends. And so when the Holiday Farm fires, is that right, happened here, and now, is everyone here from Lane County? Mostly? Okay. When those fires hit, Steve and Patty knew about kind of what had taken place in Sonoma County and the role that I had. And so pretty quick into the process, we began to kind of consult together. And never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that I would know what I know about disaster, and that I've had the opportunity to come alongside communities up and down the West Coast to offer insight in regards to disaster response. When our fires hit in 2017, as I shared, I'd been a pastor and really had a heart for unity. Had built a lot of trust among congregations, but then also had through kind of God, the way God was at work in my life, built a lot of relationship with government leaders. And so I became the person who helped coordinate the united disaster response of our churches. And then kind of through something I'll just say was an act of God, someone's like, you need to show up to this meeting, which I did, and I left that meeting co-chairing our long-term recovery group, if you know what a long-term recovery group is, for Sonoma County. And that began a 3-year journey to help 1,200 of our most vulnerable households get home as a result of what they experienced in the wildfire. So I want to talk about a united church responding to disaster. This is a picture that's becoming more and more familiar around our nation. So for us, it was the night of October 8th, the morning of October 9th. We lost over 5,000 homes overnight and began the process of disaster response. We learned a lot in responding to that disaster, but one of the reasons why I have such conviction about what I'll be sharing today is because that was 2017. In 2019, we had the Kincaid fires, where we lost 600 more homes and had the largest evacuation of our county's history. 75% of our population was told to leave home in Sonoma County. And then the following year, in 2020, the glass fires, where we lost another 600 homes during COVID. So we had that dual disaster element. And what we began to see and understand is that these types of large-scale disasters that seemed like once-in-a-generation type of things are, kind of previous big disaster had been the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. So, you're looking at roughly 40 years in between these big disasters. We're hitting the next year and the next year, and we're seeing more of this. And so I think there's been a mentality, not just in the church community, but in our broader communities, where when we hit that disaster, we respond to it, we make our adjustments, but it's about kind of how can we get back to normal. And then often some of the things that the energy and the knowledge that developed in the community and some of the systems begin to fade away. We don't maintain them, and we think, well, that was a tragedy, but hopefully we won't face that again for a little bit. And what I want to challenge us to consider is that, first of all, amazing job that happened in Lane County in supporting that response and recovery. But we have a responsibility to take the lessons that we've learned and lessons from other communities, I believe, and really utilize them to prepare ourselves to be ready to respond even better in the future. So something that I do want to make sense is, this picture right here brings disaster to the forefront. But one of the other things we need to understand about disaster is that this is the result of fire. Fire could be one of many hazard events. A pandemic is a hazard event. Flooding is a hazard event. We talk about hazard events as disasters, but I would encourage us to think about disasters a little more complex than that. The hazard event is kind of that fire, that earthquake, whatever. The disaster is how a community responds to the hazard event. And so those who study disaster will say, hey, there was a similar 6.1 earthquake here in Japan and here in Nicaragua, right? In similar sized communities, similar areas, but two very different responses to that event. The disaster is how a community responds to that event. I love what Patty said yesterday when she talked about the fact we weren't really organized or prepared for disaster response, but we drew on an incredible network of relationships. So to give some examples of what I mean, when the fires came through, we had 24 people lost their lives in that transition from October 8 to October 9. And the vast majority were seniors who didn't really have anyone in the neighborhood around them that they had relationship with. A number of them actually died in their garages because they were trying to get into their cars to drive away from the fire, and because power was out, they couldn't get their garage door open. So that's an impact of the disaster, right? The lack of relationship, the issues with power, And that can play out in the moments as we're going through the disaster. It can also play out in our time of response and recovery. As a community, we basically expected FEMA to come in and fix our issues, right? We didn't understand how important it was for us to be prepared locally. So when we opened our disaster local assistance center, FEMA came and took all the information of the addresses and who is in, because that's kind of how we do it. And we didn't understand that we could be there and do dual intake. So when it came time to meet the needs of the most vulnerable community, FEMA had all that information locked up by privacy, and we couldn't get access to help those in need right away, and had to go through a process that impacted their suffering, meant that they had to continue to be re-traumatized by telling their story over and over and over every time they needed help. And there was ignorance created a greater disaster and how it impacted in their lives, right? And so there's many ways that this can play out, not just in the moments, but over the long term. This is what researchers of communities with disaster often find with the arc of disaster. So what you see here is you've got kind of the initial kind of pre-disaster framework. I don't know if I'm going to get that right. When the disaster hits, or the hazard event hits, there's this heroic response. For us, after the Boston Marathon thing, it was Boston Strong. We had Sonoma Strong, the love in the air is thicker than the smoke, right? And so this is a time where a lot of important things happen, where walls go down and people begin to work together who have not worked together before, where government leaders stand up and make statements of resolve in terms of how they're going to support those who've been impacted by the disaster, and where the vast majority of funding comes in to meet needs. It's a very important time. And this is when the news cameras are here. This is when the out-of-state nonprofits are here. And many times people can get a sense that reality here is what's going to get you to here. But that's not what happens. And the news cameras leave, and the disaster organizations leave. And what begins to happen is, and this is up to like the 1-year anniversary, is that the community, especially those most impacted by the disaster, find themselves in a long season of progressive disillusionment. And they're getting less and less attention. Those who were not directly impacted by the disaster begin to get back to normal life. They get caught up in all the challenges of working through insurance. And, you talk to disaster survivors and they'll say, every day for, months, I'm reminded of something that I lost that wasn't in my memory before, because the fires were in October, but May comes around and I remember, my swim trunks that I saved from when I was a kid for my kids got burned in the fire, whatever it is, right? And so there's this progressive element. And this is where the church can really shine. Not just in the immediate response, which we're learning, but understanding how do we journey with a community all the way through disillusionment and forward, and how can we change the curve? Because I really believe there is no entity in your community better equipped to change the response to the hazard event and actually reshape what disaster looks like in your community like the United Church. And so part of what God's allowed me to do in our community and out of the relationships and things that have moved forward is to help build some models that you guys can take and not only contextualize but improve. Just a comment about what's happened with the sheds, and in the early moments after the disaster and in the consultation with Steve and Patty, we shared a number of things that we learned and a number of things that we did, and it became really clear, hey, this whole thing with the sheds that you guys did, we think it could work here in Lane County. And so we not only gave the idea, but we said, hey, here's all the information for an 8x8 shed, and what happened is you guys took it, you contextualized it, you made, your own adjustments to it, and then you began to implement it. And what happened out of the implementation was not just helping those who had lost homes in a fire, but it began to open doors, right, into relationship with the school system, into now how you're dealing with helping the unhoused community. And it's just, it's levels beyond what we did in Sonoma County. And so I believe all up and down the West Coast, as we've got good relationship, we're going to be able to iron sharpen iron, really help us move forward. So let me just quickly talk a little bit, because I want to get to just practically, is that all right if we're not going to do as much inspiration or whatever, but just let's nuts and bolts it here for a second here. So our churches are essential partners in disaster response. We know this, but I just want to tell, this is backed up by studies. We're trusted. We're often already known or preferred source for receiving help. So people in the community who go to a church for a distribution of food on a regular basis, they're going to think, hey, if I need help, I'm going to go to that church. Members in a congregation who have been displaced are most likely to want to spend the night in the gym at their church than at the county congregate shelter that's been set up. And many people in the margins of our community, in our situation, a lot of immigration issues, all the agriculture, vineyards, all that, they're not going to want to go to our county shelter. They're going to want to go to our churches to receive some of those elements. And that trust is huge, not just for offering service, but because of that, often people in our congregations, they get information and knowledge about what's going on in the community before our county officials will. Not always, but often. And so there's trust both in the immediate moments of the disaster and in the long term. Responsive. Churches are used to offering help. There was a study that came out in our area, and I think like 97% of congregations said that had an active expression of service into the community beyond members of their congregation on a regular basis. And during disaster, like every church tried to help in some way, right? And so we have built up this responsiveness. We know that we're going to help, but the question is, how do we do it well? Networked, each congregation in itself is a relational network, and in a framework like this area, the One Hope network of networking congregations, marketplace ministries, nonprofit organizations together, it's huge in that way. And then embedded, we live in the community, there's that local knowledge, and we're staying in the community. So, Samaritan's Purse coming in, it's so powerful, right? But it's with a particular type of expertise, and it's most effective when it's partnering with a local congregation. That's kind of their model. And where that local congregation can partner with Samaritan's Purse in such a way that when they leave, you don't lose your momentum of service. But here's the other side of it. Often we're unprepared. We're not ready to maximize our response capacity. We're ignorant of disaster, so we don't understand disaster and disaster response dynamics. And because of that, it's not that we're not helping, but it is that we're missing a lot of opportunity. One of the things that from in the disaster world that we really work together to try and minimize is duplication of benefits, right? We don't want the same family getting 3 refrigerators. That's actually illegal in terms of disaster response, and it's not effective use of resources when resources are so important. We don't necessarily understand how FEMA aid works. We don't even know that there's a VOAD. Is there a VOAD or a COAD here in Lane County? I'm guessing yes, right? But we might not know that. We might not know how to interact in that way. And so we recognize we had a lot to learn. So what we've done as a result that I want to talk about is that we created this, you see the little logo here, Sonoma County FBO. FBO stands for faith-based organizations. And so these are congregations and faith-based service organizations. And this is a disaster-specific response endeavor that we have together. And so over years of how we've built relationship, trust, kind of come to understand how disaster works better, in our context, the County of Sonoma Disaster Department of Emergency Management has said we are creating a seat in the Emergency Operations Center. When disaster is declared and we open our EOC, the churches have a chair in the EOC. So we've got an established relationship with them in that context. And a key part of that is not so we can get vetted information out to the churches. It's just as important that we can get community information from the churches into the Emergency Operations Center. And so it's this element of trusted flow of relationship and coordination to keep us from duplicating benefits, keep us from misplacing resources, energy, keep us in the flow of what's going on. Coordinated relationship with our local VOAD and COAD. So Sonoma County FBO is part of the leadership of the broader community-based organization framework responding to disaster, so that we really are working in a coordinated way with one another. We have a disaster response team. We have created a team. It mirrors our county government. So it's a team of 5 that can be 24 hours a day for multiple days in a row in our EOC. But it's also broken out into a deeper leadership team. We have 5 supervisorial districts, and each district has a team that connects in with this core team who has that local knowledge in that particular part of the county with a core variety of leadership. So we are responsive immediately with people and backup people. When our fires hit initially, our top 3 disaster response people were out of town at a disaster conference. And so you got to have that backup element. And then we have an activation plan. I'll show you that in just a minute to give you a sense. But basically, we already have planned out hours 0 to 12 on a cloud-based document. Hour 0 to 2, this is what everyone on the team is doing. This is our priorities. These are the communications we're sending. This is what we're planning for. So we're not trying to figure it out as we're going. We can make adjustments because every disaster is different, but we actually have a plan, and we know for the first 48 hours what our priorities are going to be, what the communications are that we're looking for, that type of element. We have a resource map. So one of the things I'll show you in just a minute is that we've been able to resource map over 100 congregations across our county, color-coded within each supervisorial district. They've got 60 different points of information in regards to resources that they do or don't have. And it populates into a spreadsheet, but then the spreadsheet populates onto an actual map where you can click on the dot of any church in any part of the county and see what they have to offer or not offer. This is huge, as you can imagine. We've got some probably similarities to Lane County in that, closer to the freeway, closer to our equivalent of Eugene, there's lots of service providers. But you get out a little bit more rural, and probably the only place for a congregate shelter is a church or a church camp. We got some places that are remote, and the church camp is probably the facility that's most likely to be able to do mass shelter and mass feeding. So does that church camp have a generator that would allow them to do that without power? And do we know? Or, sometimes there's smaller types of disasters like extreme cold or extreme heat. So who's set up to have a couple rooms set up for a cooling center that could be used at, or overnight be able to offer, a warm spot for people? And then we regularly train and test, and we've looped in for us also active attacker training for all of our churches is part of this element. And so we're regularly doing tabletop exercises, testing our plan, doing the coordination, so when disaster strikes, we're ready to go. And the point here is not so much, look how great we are. There's lots of holes in what we do. I'm not here to try and impress, but more, we've done some work to develop some tools, some agreements, some ways of responding that, it's not proprietary, it's not being sold, it's available as we can interact, right? So all up and down the West Coast, wouldn't it be awesome if the church is ready to shine network to network? So we're one of 9 Bay Area counties that's done this work. Now we're utilizing what we've done in Sonoma County and taking it Bay Area wide. So that now this resource mapping is not just for 1 in 9 counties, but it's coming around that way. So we're seeing this move forward. Just quickly, see if I can get this right. Our 2-day activation plan, very simple document, names and numbers, and you've got just, boom, this is the sequence of activities, right? Our 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and it's all sequenced in with how our emergency operations center is functioning, coordinated around their briefings, that type of element. And let me see if I'm back here. And then for the resource map, so you've got color-coded by the districts. And let me see if this is right. So you've got just a simple pull-down menu. It's not all 56 categories, but 20 of the most important. So during COVID, when we had to evacuate for fire, we weren't able to do congregate shelter the same way that we wanted. And we know with special needs, you've got all of these types of challenges. So they would reach out to churches and saying, we don't need a gym for 100 people. We need a classroom for a family. How many classrooms, how many families can we put at your church, where you can do non-congregate shelter that's specific? And in our situation, fewer and fewer churches have showers. And so which churches are ready and willing to take mobile shower units, and where are we sourcing those from? So these are just some practical examples of what we've done and are doing.